Hey everyone, it's Ryan, and welcome to another edition of Faculty in 15. It's the podcast where we give one University of Guelph faculty 15 minutes to answer 15 questions about their work, expertise, and a little bit about themselves, and of course, the University of Guelph. Today, I'm lucky to be joined by Dr. Jamie Burr. Dr. Jamie Burr is an associate professor at the University of Guelph's College of Biological Science in the Department of Human Health Sciences and is the director of the Human Performance and Health Research Laboratory. He's previously worked with Olympic athletes and as a consultant for various professional sports teams, but Dr. Burr currently splits his time between Guelph and Chicago, where he works as a high-performance advisor for the Chicago Blackhawks. Welcome to the podcast, Dr. Burr. How are you today?
Thanks, Ryan. I'm doing great. How are you?
Okay, good. Okay, so as like a performance expert, is there anything you need to do before we get started? Because this is pretty intense.
I don't think so.
No like mental ritual or kind of superstition.
We
Or,
took care of it all before we logged on here.
you got your lucky socks on? Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Well, then we'll kick it off. Like I said, we got 15 minutes. We're going to go through these 15 questions, but we'll see how we do. All right. Start the clock. I feel like I need like some sort of timer or some sort of bell to ring now that I do this, but we'll get there. Okay, so let's get going. So, first question. Since working with the Chicago Blackhawks, what's a change or impact you've had that you're most proud of?
Yeah, I think probably the thing that I'm most proud of in Chicago is actually bringing a lot of what I do here in Guelph to that sort of a setting. So, one of my goals in helping drive the sports science and performance team there is to think about how do we approach that scientifically? How do we know that we're right about the kind of changes and things that we're trying to do? So bringing the scientific process to that and examining our own beliefs and using critical thinking, I think has been a real step forward, and I'm happy with that.
Nice. Next question. What sport do you think has benefited the most from your research and why?
Yeah, so I hesitate to say that anything I specifically have done is a reason an athlete has performed well or poorly, for that matter. Um, I wouldn't be so arrogant to suggest that, but objectively, if I look at some of the research we've done and the teams that we've worked with, I think it's probably easiest to see it in those sports that are like time trials or races. So one example I could give is we did some work with Rowing Canada using BFR, which is a technique where we cut off blood flow during training.
Hmm.
And it was really rewarding to see just how well some of the athletes did. Like these are Olympic level rowers, so they're very good to begin with. And we had something like 9 or 10 set lifetime personal bests. Surprising and exceptional. And it's kind of neat to see them, when they're working that hard already to get that much better.
Yeah, of course. Next question. What first drew you to the University of Guelph and what keeps you here?
Yeah, I'm actually from the Guelph area. So as an academic, the opportunity to go home and work there is very rare. So that was appealing. But I think bigger than that, I mean, the University of Guelph, particularly in my field, we have a great reputation, and we have fantastic colleagues here, great students, very science based, and we punch above our weight class. So
Hmm. Yeah,
I
for sure. Okay, next question. How would you explain to a 5-year-old what cardiovascular physiology is and how it can affect an athlete's performance?
Yeah, I mean, cardiovascular physiology is the study of the pump and the tubes that move blood throughout our body. So we're trying to figure out how do we make that more efficient so we can, run faster, go longer, push harder. That's kind of the idea.
Nice. Yeah, I guess the heart probably plays a big part in that. So, of course. Um, what initially inspired you to study human performance and exercise science?
I get asked this kind of thing a lot and how I got into what I do, and I still don't have the greatest answer. But the reality is, I didn't think I was going to study cardiovascular physiology. It wasn't the big plan. I think everybody thinks professors go like, from birth. It's like, I'm going to do that. It wasn't. I thought I was going to go to med school. I always enjoyed athletics and stuff, so I had an interest there. And quite honestly, I didn't get into med school on my first try. So I thought I'm going to go do a master's degree and make myself look a little bit better on paper. And then I kind of fell in love with it when I realized what we could do, and it was much more up my alley. So that's kind of how I naturally landed here.
Yeah, you hear that a lot where people have like a very set goal, but then they find their passion along the way. They're actually often surprised that where they ended up, but they're happy about it.
I
Uh,
often say to students, like, if you have a good goal in mind, you can be working towards that. And if it's a slight deviation, then great, right? You end up somewhere good or even better. So it's fine to change plans as you go.
of course. Next question. What excites you the most about your current research?
Um, I think one of the best things about being a professor is nobody ever tells me what to look at. So I'm excited to come to work every day because we're always working on cool things. At least I think they're cool. Because if they're not cool, then we switch gears and we look at something else that is
Right.
cool. So I'm always excited about the things that we're doing because I get to choose what they are.
Nice. Um, Imagine you have 60 seconds to convince a potential donor to invest $10 million in your research. What is your pitch?
Yeah, I think one of the coolest things about what we're doing now, in looking at how we can amplify the effects of exercise, particularly through this blood flow restriction line of work, is exercise is good for just about everything. And sometimes I feel like a used car salesman, where I'm like, oh yeah, it does this and it does that. Um, so I think that would probably be my pitch. And I think it's not just about athletes, right? Like working with elite athletes and helping them get fractions of a second better or whatever it might be is cool. But it also applies to clinical populations and, um, making life better for everybody. And I think there's some really cool applications in areas that we can expand in that.
Nice. Can it help people not get out of breath going up the stairs? It doesn't. I feel like my whole life, no matter how good a shape I've ever gotten, that seems to always tire me out.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's like what's overlooked. Like high performance, it depends on where you're starting from. Like, what is the next step for you? We kind of talk sometimes about like high intensity living, and if you're 90 years old, getting up the stairs may be the hardest thing you do in a day, and it's legitimately hard for you. So, yeah, I think we improving performance can be it can look like a whole lot of different things.
Nice. What is one thing you wish people understood better about your research?
Um, I think probably, I mean, with the work I'm doing with Chicago, uh, I feel like that's often misunderstood. I think people have this perception that because I'm a sports scientist, I'm in the locker room with test tubes and making potions, as people describe it, which isn't really what the day to day looks like. Um, High performance is a lot of things, and sometimes it's dealing with people, and sometimes it's asking questions that we don't know the answers to, or applying answers that we know to different settings. And so I think that's probably the most misunderstood part. Like sometimes it's really simple, and sometimes it's really really complex, and sort of blending those worlds.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
What's one thing you wish you understood better about your own research?
We've got a few problems that we're kind of working on now that I'd really like to nail down. We've been working at it, and sometimes we ask a question and we get the answer right. It's exactly what we thought it would be. And sometimes we ask a question and we're completely wrong, which is okay because that's still progress. So there's a few things like understanding what's going on with blood volume and how we're affecting all these things in the way that we stress the body, is something I'd like to get at. I think the other thing I'd like to get at is just in my field in general. There's a little bit of not from our group, I hope, but a little bit of bro science that comes with it.
Mm,
Like, hey, let's make people bigger and stronger and bulky, um, which is cool if that's your thing. But I think understanding a little bit more about the mechanisms, because I
mm,
think then we can apply it to all sorts of different parts of human life a little
mm.
bit more effectively. So I think that's sort of where I'd like to move on that.
Nice. And what do you hope to accomplish with your research in the next 5 years?
I think it sort of relates to what I talked about there. I think just understanding the natural world as it is, and things that we don't know, because I think sometimes we have to ask questions um, without an application in mind sometimes. So once we understand, and then we can optimize for how we're going to use that moving forward. So I think in my world, there's a lot of questions that remain unresolved. So we know something works, but we don't know why. And once we
Mm,
understand the why, then we can really start to figure out how we can use that better.
nice. In your opinion, what makes a successful graduate student at the Human Performance and Health Research Lab?
Yeah, I think particularly in my lab, we do what I describe as team-based science. So being able to work with others
Mm,
is really important. And I think being smart is important to be a grad student, but I think most people that land in grad school are smart. So I don't know that that's
mm-hmm,
the defining feature. To me, I think a successful grad student needs to be creative,
mm,
which is not something that's often thought about with science.
mm-hmm.
Um, I think being kind and compassionate and working with others is a huge part of it, particularly in a team-based
Yeah,
setting.
yeah. Yeah. Well, you're not an island, right? Like you have to work with other people, and if you're not the nicest person, then I imagine your career doesn't go too far.
Yeah, and I mean networking and all that stuff. It sounds cliche, but like I think within science and in the other work I'm doing too, like the the reliance on team is huge. And I think
Mm,
learning those soft skills are just as important as some of those hard skills.
for sure. Well, speaking of teamwork, is there a colleague or faculty at the University of Guelph whose work you really admire?
There are many faculty at the University of Guelph whose work I admire and look up to for sure. I think in HHS, Human Health Science, where I work, we're blessed to have a wealth of expertise and people that can sort of cross boundaries and research areas. Um, so, for example, Graham Holloway, a colleague of mine who I collaborate with regularly, his lab is capable of doing more molecular work,
Mm,
and they can ask and answer questions that we don't. So, I do look up to that. I think that's really cool. It helps us work together well, and his lab in particular crosses over between animal models and human models, which I
mm,
think is a really unique skill set. So,
nice. If you could only eat one campus meal for the rest of your University of Guelph career, what would it be?
we have great food on campus. I think one of my favorites is it's the place over at the UC where you can order different food. You put it in a bowl and then they cook it up
Right,
for you
right.
in front of you. And I forget what it's actually called, but you can never go wrong, and it's always different.
Yeah, yeah. I feel like pretty much everything in the UC is you're pretty safe, you know.
Yeah, it's pretty good.
Uh,
There's a pretty good Mexican place over there too.
nice. And so we're already at our last question. So what does improved life mean to you?
I'm going to loop back to kind of what we talked about before, that I think improving life can look differently for different people. And I think that's really important. So whether you're an elite athlete and you're trying to make an Olympic team or set a world record, or if you're somebody with chronic disease that's trying to just get through life with fewer barriers,
Hmm.
um, I think these are all ways that we're improving life. And I think that's kind of how my lab can hopefully contribute to that in helping people get over whatever barriers they're facing.
Amazing. Well, we got through all the questions, and I think we did it in record time. But off the clock, is there anything else you want to talk, like you want to leave our audience with in terms of your research or the University of Guelph?
Think so, to be honest. I,
Right.
yeah, I mean, I think Guelph's such an awesome place. There's lots of cool people doing really great things here, and it's kind of exciting just to share that little piece that we have.
Nice. Well, thank you so much, Dr. Burr. I really appreciate you taking the time to chat with me and our audience. If you like what you heard, please like and subscribe to wherever you get your podcast. And for the latest updates, you be sure to follow us on all our socials. And for more info, you can always visit uatguelph.ca. All the links will be in our show notes. And we'll be back next time with another faculty in another 15 minutes. Till next time, thanks so much for listening.